My brother slid a loan document across my kitchen table on a Tuesday night in March and told me that if I loved our family, I would sign it before the coffee got cold. $92,000. My name as cosigner, his startup as collateral. My mother was sitting 2 chairs away with her hands folded the way she folds them in church, and my father wouldn't look up from the rim of his mug. And Jonah was smiling, the smile he uses on investors who don't know him yet. I asked one question. I asked if I could see his credit report first. Just the standard one. Just the one any cosigner is legally entitled to pull. The room went so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum. My mother's hands unfolded. My father finally looked up. And Jonah, who had spent the last 6 weeks calling me his favorite sister, his rock, his secret weapon, Jonah's smile slipped exactly half an inch on the left side of his mouth. That half inch told me everything I needed to know about the last 11 years of my life. My name is Marin. I'm 34 years old, I'm a forensic accountant, and for most of my adult life, I've made a quiet living, finding the things people hope nobody will ever look at too closely. Hidden accounts. Shell companies. The $2,000 charge that doesn't match the receipt. The clients call me when something feels wrong, but they can't explain why. I trace the feeling back to a number. The number tells the truth the people couldn't. What I did next, they didn't expect it. I want to tell you about my family before I tell you about that loan, because if you only hear the ending, you'll think I'm cruel. I'm not cruel. I'm just done. There's a difference, and the difference took me 34 years to learn. We grew up in a brick split level on the south side of Roanoke, in a neighborhood where everyone's father worked at the rail yard or the hospital, and everyone's mother knew everyone else's business by Sunday. My father, Glenn, worked dispatch at Norfolk Southern for 31 years before his knees gave out. My mother, Loretta, taught 4th grade at the same elementary school she'd attended as a child. They were not wealthy, they were not poor. They were proud, and they were exhausted, and they had 3 children. And from the moment my brother Jonah was born, the entire orbit of the household reset around him. He came home from the hospital with a head of dark hair and a laugh that made strangers stop on the sidewalk. My older sister, Laurel, who was 7 at the time, has told me more than once that she watched our mother look at Jonah in his crib and forget anyone else was in the room. Laurel handled it by leaving. She got a scholarship to William and Mary, married a man from Richmond, and now calls home twice a year on holidays we are obligated to acknowledge. I handled it by staying. I was the middle child, and I made myself useful, because useful was the only currency that bought me 10 minutes of being seen. Jonah did not have to be useful. Jonah only had to exist. I want to be honest with you about something, because if I'm not honest about this part, the rest of the story won't make sense. I loved him. I still love him in the strange archaeological way you love a person who used to be someone different. When I was 16, I had a college interview at a small school in Lexington, and my mother had gone to bed early with one of her headaches, and I realized at 11 o'clock at night that the top button on my interview blazer had come off in the dryer. I sat down on the kitchen floor and cried, because I was 16 and tired, and nobody in that house was going to fix it for me. And Jonah, 14 years old, skinny, still wearing the marching band t-shirt he slept in. Jonah came downstairs, found our mother's sewing kit in the hall closet, and sat down next to me on the linoleum and sewed that button on. Crookedly, with navy thread on a black blazer. He didn't say a word the whole time. When he finished, he handed it to me and said, "You're gonna get in, Mare. They'd be stupid not to take you." I got in. I have carried that memory like a coin in my pocket for 18 years. I have rubbed it smooth. Every time he disappointed me after that, and there were many times, I'd reach into my pocket and feel the edges of that coin, and I'd tell myself, that boy is still in there somewhere. The boy who sewed the button, he's just buried under the man. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things. But that's the warning sign I rationalized first, and I want you to know I rationalized it. Because the people who underestimate you don't always do it on purpose. Sometimes you train them to. Sometimes you hand them the leash yourself. By the time Jonah was 21, he had dropped out of 2 colleges and started his first business, a marketing consultancy that lasted 9 months. My parents called it a learning experience. My father quietly wrote him a check for $4,200 to tide him over, and I know the exact amount because I was home that weekend, and I saw the carbon copy on the kitchen. Counter while I was making my own coffee. $4,200 was almost exactly what I had spent on my last semester of graduate school, which I had paid for myself, working 2 jobs and eating ramen 4 nights a week, while my mother told her sister at the phone on that Marin was doing fine. She's always been the practical one. The practical one. That's what they called me. It was the kindest way they knew how to say invisible. Jonah's second business was an app. I don't remember what it did. Something with restaurants. It lasted 14 months and ended with a cease and desist from a larger company that had the same idea first. My parents took out a second mortgage on the house to help him pay the legal fees. I found out about that one at Christmas, when my mother mentioned it the way you mentioned the weather, and I sat there with a plate of ham on my lap and felt my whole face go numb. Laurel had called me the week before from Richmond and told me she'd sent our parents $900 toward their property taxes because Dad had mentioned he was short. $900 from Laurel. A second mortgage for Jonah. I didn't say a word at that Christmas dinner. I helped my mother with the dishes and drove home and sat in my car in my own driveway for 40 minutes before I went inside. Jonah's third business was a cryptocurrency thing. I'm not going to pretend I understood it, because I'm not sure he did either. It lasted 6 months. The investors were friends of friends from his old fraternity, and when it collapsed, 2 of them stopped talking to him, and one of them, a man named Hugo, who I'd met once at a barbecue, called my father at 11 o'clock at night and said things that made my mother cry for a week. My father gave Hugo $8,000 out of his retirement account to make it right. Jonah was not asked to contribute. Jonah was in fact on a beach in Tulum that week, decompressing, as my mother put it, because the stress had been so hard on him. I remember sitting at my desk at work the Monday after I found out about the $8,000, looking at a spreadsheet for a client whose own brother had been embezzling from a family construction company for 9 years, and thinking very clearly, the way you think things in the shower. I know what this looks like from the outside. I know exactly what this looks like. I am looking at it every day, and I cannot see it in my own kitchen. That was the second warning sign. I rationalized it. I told myself my family was different. I told myself love is not a balance sheet. I told myself a lot of things that turned out to be the kind of things people tell themselves right before they sign something they shouldn't. The third warning sign came on my 33rd birthday. I had invited my parents and Jonah to dinner at a restaurant downtown, a nice place, the kind of place you go for an anniversary. My boyfriend at the time, a kind man named Reed, who eventually became my fiancé and is still my fiancé as I tell you this, had made the reservation. Jonah arrived 40 minutes late, ordered the most expensive thing on the menu, and spent the entire dinner pitching my father on a new venture. A real one this time, he said, with infrastructure, with a moat, with believers. My mother kept reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. My father kept nodding. Nobody asked me a single question about my work, my life, my engagement, or the fact that I had just been promoted to senior partner at 33, which is young, by the way, in my field. When the check came, Reed quietly paid it because nobody else moved, and Jonah hugged me on the way out and said, "Happy birthday, Mayor." Family is the only real investment, you know that, right? Family is the only real investment. I want you to remember that sentence. He said it to me 4 more times in the next 18 months, in 4 different rooms, and every time he said it, I felt my chest tighten in a way I couldn't name. Now I can name it. Now I know that when a man tells you family is the only real investment, what he is really telling you is that he has stopped seeing you as family and started seeing you as capital. Which brings us to the loan, which brings us to the Tuesday in March. Which brings us to my kitchen table, and the coffee and the document, and the half-inch his smile slipped on the left side of his mouth when I asked to see his credit report. It was 7:43 in the evening. I know because I looked at the microwave clock when my mother arrived. They came in one car, my parents and Jonah, which was strange in itself because Jonah always drove separately, always made his own entrance, always left when he wanted to leave. The fact that they had carpooled told me this was coordinated. This was rehearsed. They had talked about it on the drive over. They had decided, before they walked through my door, what each of them was going to say and when. My mother was wearing the AV cardigan she wears to PTA meetings and difficult conversations. My father had on a tie, which he hadn't worn to my apartment once in the 4 years I'd lived there. Jonah was carrying a leather portfolio I'd never seen before, the kind a man buys when he wants to feel like the version of himself he hasn't earned yet. He set it on the table between us like he was setting down a chess piece. Reed was upstairs. I had told him before they arrived that I'd handle it. He had kissed my forehead and said, "You don't have to handle anything you don't want to handle, Marin." I remember that exact sentence because at the time I thought he was being sweet, and now I understand he was being prophetic. There's a difference between being sweet and being prophetic. He turned out to be both. I made coffee. I had made a coffee cake that afternoon because that's what I do. I bake when I'm anxious. I bake when I don't know what's coming. I bake the way some people drink. There was cinnamon in the air, and the sound of the radiator clicking, and the low hum of the dishwasher I'd started before they arrived. My mother complimented the cake. My father said it smelled like his own mother's kitchen. Jonah didn't touch his slice. "Mare," he said. He always called me Mare when he wanted something. "I'm going to be straight with you. I need your help. The family needs your help." I poured cream into my coffee and watched it bloom and said nothing. He talked for 11 minutes. I timed it later against the clock on my phone because I'm a forensic accountant and I time things. He talked about a software company. He talked about a contract with a regional health system that was almost signed, just waiting on procurement, just waiting on the legal team, just waiting on one more meeting. He talked about a runway and a burn rate, and a Series A he was almost guaranteed if he could just get to the demo. He used the word visionary about himself twice. He used the word believers 3 times. He said the bank had pre-approved him for $92,000 at a competitive rate, but they needed a co-signer with strong credit, and mom and dad's credit wasn't where it needed to be after the second mortgage, and Laurel had said no, which was the first I'd heard of Laurel being asked, by the way, and I filed that away, and so it had to be me. It had to be me because I was the only one in the family with the credit score and the income and the love for him to make this happen. The love for him. My mother nodded the whole time he talked. My father stared into his coffee. When Jonah finished, my mother reached across the table and put her hand over mine, and she said, very softly, the way she used to say it when I was 8 and had skinned my knee, "Sweetheart, this is what families do for each other. This is what families do for each other." I want to tell you what I felt in that moment because if I lie to you about this, the rest of the story is a lie. I felt the urge to sign. I felt it in my shoulders first, the way you feel a yes coming before you've decided to say it. I felt my mother's hand on mine, and I felt my father in his tie. And I felt my brother across the table looking at me the way he looked at me when he sewed that button onto my blazer when I was 16. And I felt the whole machinery of being the practical one, the useful one, the one who fixes it, click into place in my chest. I almost said yes, I want you to know. I almost said yes. I am not a strong woman in that moment. I am a tired woman who has spent 33 years buying 10 minutes of being seen. But I am also a forensic accountant. And forensic accountants are trained, before we are trained in anything else, to ask one question before we sign anything. Just one. I pulled my hand out from under my mother's. I picked up my coffee, I took a slow sip, and I said, "I'd like to see your credit report first, Jonah, the full one. Just standard due diligence." That's when the room went quiet. That's when my mother's hands unfolded. That's when my father finally looked up. That's when Jonah's smile slipped that half-inch on the left side of his mouth, and I watched it slip, and I watched him catch it, and I watched him put it back. And in the 2 seconds between the slip and the catch, I saw something in my brother's face I had never seen before. I saw fear, not the performed fear he used when he was pitching investors and wanted them to feel needed. Real fear. The fear of a man who has been very carefully managing what other people are allowed to see about him for a very long time, and who has just realized one of those people is no longer willing to stay managed. "Mayor," he said, and his voice had gone careful. The way a voice goes careful when the person speaking is choosing each word against a list of words they are not allowed to say. We don't need to do all that. You know me. You've known me my whole life. "I know," I said, "and I love you, and I'd still like to see your credit report. The bank's already going to pull it. I just want to see it first." As my mother said my name, the way she says it when she is disappointed in me. "Marin, honey, are you really going to make your brother feel like he's being investigated in your own home?" Over family? I looked at her. I want to tell you, I looked at her with calm. I didn't. I looked at her with 28 years of swallowed down everything, and I think she saw it for a second because her eyes went a little wide, and then she did what she always does, which was to turn her face back into the face of a mother who is being misunderstood by her difficult daughter. I'm not making him feel anything, I said. I'm signing a document that puts $92,000 of my name on the line. I'd like the same information the bank is going to have. That's all. My father cleared his throat. He hadn't spoken yet. He cleared his throat the way he used to clear his throat before he told us a rule he didn't want to enforce. Marin, he said, your brother is sitting right here. You can ask him anything you want to know. Why do you need a piece of paper? I could have said many things. I could have said because pieces of paper don't lie, and people do. I could have said because I have spent 7 years of my career looking at pieces of paper for clients exactly like Jonah, and the pieces of paper always tell a story the people are very surprised by. I could have said because I love my brother and I do not trust him, and the fact that those two things can be true at the same time isn't something none of you have ever been willing to look at directly. I didn't say any of that. I want to be honest about that too. I could have, but I didn't. I just said, because that's how I do it, Dad. With every client, with every loan. I'm not going to do it differently because it's family. I'd actually like to do it more carefully because it's family. Jonah laughed. It was not a real laugh. It was the laugh of a man buying himself 3 seconds. Okay, he said. Okay, fine. I'll send it to you tomorrow. You can pull it right now, I said. On your phone. It's free. There's an app. He looked at me. For a long moment he looked at me, and I saw him calculate. I saw him run the numbers behind his eyes. The way I've watched 100 clients run the numbers when they realize the thing they thought they were going to get away with is about to come apart in the next 60 seconds. I saw him decide. My phone's almost dead, he said. I'll do it at home. I'll send it to you first thing in the morning. Okay, I said. I didn't push. I want you to notice that I didn't push. Because I already had what I needed. The only person at that table who didn't understand what had just happened was my mother. My father understood. I could see it in the way his shoulders dropped half an inch. And Jonah understood. Jonah understood completely. Jonah understood that I had asked the one question he could not answer without becoming, in front of our parents, the person he had spent 11 years and 3 failed businesses convincing them he was not. They left 20 minutes later. My mother hugged me at the door and told me she hoped I'd really think about this, Marin, because family's the only real investment we have. She didn't even know she was quoting him. Or maybe she did. I don't know anymore which of his lines she fed him and which of her lines he fed back. I closed the door. I locked it. I leaned my forehead against the wood. And I stood there for a long time, in the cinnamon smell of a coffee cake nobody had finished, listening to the radiator click, until Reed came down the stairs and put his arms around me from behind and said very quietly, "Are you okay?" "No," I said, "but I'm going to be." I did not sleep that night. I want to tell you, I went into some calm, professional mode, the way the women in movies do when they decide to fight back. But that's not what happened. What happened was that I sat on the couch with my laptop open and a glass of red wine I did not drink, and I cried for about 40 minutes, very quietly. The kind of crying where your shoulders shake but no sound comes out, because Reed was asleep upstairs, and I didn't want to wake him. I cried because I knew. I knew before I pulled a single document. I knew the moment Jonah's smile slipped that half inch. I knew the way you know a tumor is malignant before the biopsy comes back, because your body has already started grieving. What I did next, I did not do as his sister. I did it as a forensic accountant. Those are 2 different people, and on that night in March, I let the accountant drive. I have access, through my firm, to credit reporting tools the average person does not have. I am not going to walk you through the technical details because they're not the point, and because I want to be careful about what I describe. What I will tell you is this: I had Jonah's full legal name, his date of birth, his social security number, which my mother had given me herself 2 years earlier, when she'd asked me to help her file a piece of paperwork for him. And I had the address history of every place he had lived since he was 18. I had everything I needed, and in my professional capacity, with the parameters of a legitimate no-signer inquiry, I pulled the report. It came back at 2:17 in the morning. I read it 3 times, The first time I read it in shock, the second time I read it making notes. The third time, I read it with the kind of calm I usually feel at the end of a 6-month investigation, when all the threads finally pull into the same knot. My brother had 3 open lines of credit in collections, total outstanding, $41,000. He had a judgment against him from a landlord in Charlotte, from a property I had never heard of him living in, for 9 months of unpaid rent. He had a default on a small business loan he had taken out 2 years earlier, in the amount of $22,000, from a community bank in Lynchburg. And this was the one that made me put my face in my hands for a full minute. He had an active payment plan with the IRS for unpaid taxes from his second business, the app, the one our parents had taken out a second mortgage to help him fight. He had told them the legal fees ate everything. He had not told them about the back taxes. The back taxes were his. The back taxes were $31,000, and he was paying them down at $400 a month, which meant he had been carrying that debt in secret for years. The total picture, when I added it up on the legal pad next to my laptop, was somewhere between $94,000 and $97,000 in debt and liabilities, depending on how I counted the interest. He had asked me to co-sign for $92,000. I sat with that number for a long time. I sat with it until the sky outside started to go gray. And then I did something I am not proud of, but I want to tell you anyway. Because I told you I would tell you the truth. I went into the bathroom, I sat on the edge of the bathtub, and I dry heaved for about 3 minutes. Not from disgust, from grief. From the very specific grief of finally seeing, in black and white on a credit report, the exact shape of a brother I had spent 18 years convincing myself was someone else. I rubbed the coin in my pocket, the button, the boy on the kitchen floor with the navy thread. He was gone. He had been gone for a long time. I had just been refusing to file the paperwork. I did not call my parents. I did not call Jonah. I went upstairs. I crawled into bed next to Reed. He woke up halfway, and he reached for me without opening his eyes, and he said, "Hey." And I said, "Hey." And he said, "Bad?" And I said, "Bad." And he held me, and I slept for 2 hours. And when I woke up, the accountant was driving again, and the sister was sitting in the passenger seat, and I knew exactly what I was going to do. I want to tell you that I went straight to my parents that morning and laid it all out, and the family healed. I want to tell you that. But that's not what happened, because that's not how any of this works. What actually happened was that I spent 3 weeks trying to fix it without breaking anything, and I made it worse every single time. The first attempt was the gentle one. I called my mother on the Wednesday morning, less than 12 hours after they'd left my kitchen, and I asked her to coffee, just her. I told her I wanted to talk about Jonah, that I had concerns, that I needed her to hear me out before I made any decisions about the loan. She agreed. She sounded tense on the phone, but agreed. We met at a place near her school during her planning period, a little cafe with a chalkboard munch and too many ferns, and I sat across from her with my hands wrapped around a mug, and I tried, gently, to tell her some of what I had found. I did not show her the report. I did not name specific numbers. I just said, "Mom, I have reason to believe Jonah is in significant debt he hasn't told you about, not just from the businesses. Personal. I think we need to all sit down together, Dad too, and look at the whole picture before any of us co-signs anything." She went still. She set down her cup. And she said, in a voice I had not heard her use since I was 12, and had told her a teacher had been unkind to me, "Marin, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Your brother is going through the hardest period of his life. He is finally on the verge of building something real. And you, of all people, with your good job and your nice apartment and your fiancé and your savings, you want to drag him into a meeting and humiliate him in front of his father because you found something on the internet?" I said, "Mom, it's not the internet. It's a credit report." She said, "I don't care what it is. I will not have my son interrogated by his sister because she's decided to play detective in her own family." I sat there in that little cafe with the ferns, and I felt my whole face heat up. I want to tell you I held my ground. I didn't. I said, "Okay, Mom, okay, I'm sorry. I just wanted to talk." And she reached across the table and patted my hand the way she pats the hands of her fourth graders when they've finished crying. And she said, "I know you mean well, sweetheart. You always mean well. But sometimes meaning well isn't the same as helping." I paid the check. I drove home. I sat in my car in my own parking lot and put my head on the steering wheel. That was attempt 1. Attempt 2 was the structured one. I waited 4 days. I drafted a long, careful email to both my parents, not Jonah, laying out, in the most neutral language I could manage, that I had professional concerns about co-signing the loan, that I would be happy to act as a financial advisor to the family at no cost, and that I would like to schedule a sit-down meeting with all 4 of us, me, them, and Jonah, to review Jonah's actual financial situation before any document was signed. I cited my credentials. I cited my license. I cited the standards I am required to apply to any loan over $50,000 in my professional life. I made it about my profession, not about Jonah, because I thought if I made it about my profession, my parents could hear it without hearing an accusation. I sent the email on a Sunday night. My father called me on Monday morning at 7:15. He was at the kitchen table. I could hear my mother in the background, and I could tell from the rhythm of her voice that she was the one who had drafted what he was about to say. "Marin," he said, "we got your email." "Okay," I said. "Your mother and I have talked about this, and we don't think a formal meeting is the right way to handle a family matter." "Dad, let me finish, honey. We don't think it's the right way. Your brother is a grown man. He's been through a lot. The last thing he needs is his sister sitting him down like he's a client at her firm and asking him to defend himself. We're going to handle this the way our family handles things, around the kitchen table, with love." I closed my eyes. I said, "Dad, I'm offering to do this for free. I'm offering my professional services to make sure our family doesn't lose another house." I'm not trying to embarrass anyone," he said very quietly. "Honey, you're already embarrassing him. You just don't see it." I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. I sat with the question of whether he was right, whether I had let my profession make me cold, whether I was, in fact, using credit reports and meetings and credentials to do something I should have been doing with hugs and home cooking. I sat with the question of whether the woman my mother saw in that cafe, the woman with the good job and the nice apartment and the fiancé, had become someone who could no longer love her own brother the way a sister loves a brother. I sat with that for almost an hour. I want you to know I sat with it because I did not enter this with certainty. I entered it with doubt. But here is the thing about doubt. Doubt is honest. Doubt is what tells you to check your work. Doubt does not tell you to sign a $92,000 loan for a man whose credit report you have already read. That was attempt 2. Attempt 3 was the desperate one, and the desperate one is the one I am most embarrassed about. I called Laurel. I had not called my sister voluntarily in almost 4 years. Our relationship had survived our childhood by becoming a series of polite Christmas cards. But I called her on the Wednesday of the 3rd week, from my office, with my door closed, and when she picked up, she said, "Marin," in a voice that meant she thought somebody had died. "Nobody's dead," I said. "I need to ask you something." "Okay, did Jonah ask you to co-sign a loan?" There was a long pause, long enough that I knew the answer before she spoke. Three months ago," she said, "for $115,000. He told me you'd already said yes." I closed my eyes. I leaned back in my chair. I looked at the ceiling of my office, at the water stain shaped like a comma in the corner, and I started to laugh, very softly, the kind of laugh that is not a laugh. "He told me you said no," I said. "He told Mom and Dad you said no." "Marin," Laurel said. Her voice had changed. It had gone into a register I hadn't heard from her since we were teenagers. "Marin, he told me you said yes. He told me you said yes and that you were already in for 92 and that he only needed me for the difference. Because the bank wouldn't take 2 co-signers from the same household, and he needed mine for a, quote, secondary line. He showed me a document. With your signature on it." I sat very still. "Laurel," I said, "I have never signed anything." "I know that now," she said. "I figured that out about 6 weeks ago when I asked Mom about your, quote, contribution, and she had no idea what I was talking about. I told her I'd let her handle it. I'm sorry, Mayor. I'm so sorry. I should have called you. I didn't know how to call you. We haven't really talked in." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry. It's okay. It's not okay. It's not okay that he forged your signature." I want to stop here and tell you something, because what Laurel said is the moment the story turned, and I want to give it its full weight. My brother had forged my signature on a document to get $115,000 from my sister. 3 months before he sat down at my kitchen table and asked me, with our parents in the room, to sign one for him myself. He had been doing this for a long time. He had been doing it in concentric circles. He had been doing it to all of us, separately, in private, with different numbers and different stories and different leverage points. And the only reason it had not all come apart sooner was that none of us were talking to each other. I called Laurel back 20 minutes later, after I had stood up and walked around my office 3 times and drunk a glass of water and sat back down. I said, "Laurel, I need you to send me a copy of the document he showed you, with my forged signature on it." She sent it within the hour. It was my signature, the way I had signed it on my college applications when I was 18. Not the way I sign things now. He had pulled it from somewhere old, a yearbook maybe, a letter, something he had access to as my brother. I sat at my desk with that document open on my screen for a long time. I want to be honest about what I felt. I felt cold, not angry, cold. The way I feel at work when a case crosses from being a financial concern into being a crime. There is a moment in this job when you realize the person you are looking at is not just irresponsible, they are deliberate. They have made decisions. They have chosen, again and again, to do the thing they are doing. They have not been swept away by circumstance. They have been steering. Jonah had been steering. That was attempt 3. Or maybe attempt 3 is what happened next, because that is when I stopped trying to fix it gently and started trying to fix it correctly, and trying to fix it correctly meant breaking something. And the something I had to break was my mother's belief that her son was the boy in the photograph she kept on the mantle. I drove to my parents' house on a Saturday. I did not call ahead. I brought Laurel. She had flown down from Richmond. I had not asked her to fly down. She had bought the ticket herself, called me from the airport, and said, "I'm coming. I should have come a long time ago." We pulled into the driveway at 1 in the afternoon. My mother opened the door and saw both of us standing on the porch, and her face did something I had never seen it do. It went pale. She knew in that instant that the two daughters who never visited together had visited together, and she knew what that meant. And I watched her body decide whether to invite us in or close the door, and to her credit, she opened it wider. My father was in his chair in the den, watching a basketball game with the sound low. He looked up, he saw Laurel. He said, "Hi, sweetheart," and then he saw my face, and the words died in his throat. I asked, "He's not here," my mother said. "He's not meeting with somebody. About the loan." "Call him," I said. "Tell him to come home. Marin, Mom, call him. We're going to sit at this table, the 5 of us, and we're going to talk about the loan, the way Dad said, around the kitchen table, with love." She looked at me for a long moment. I want to tell you what was in her face. There was fear. There was anger. There was the very specific grief of a mother who has spent 30 years carrying water for one child and is realizing the other two have stopped being thirsty. There was a flicker, and this is the part I will remember for the rest of my life. There was a flicker of something that might have been relief, as if some part of her, very deep down, had been waiting for one of us to finally walk in and end it. She called him. He showed up 40 minutes later, in a button-down shirt and his leather portfolio, smiling the smile he uses on investors. And the smile slipped the second time that month when he saw Laurel sitting at the kitchen table with a manila folder in front of her. I should pause here because I want you to know something. If you have ever been the person who finally said the thing nobody else in your family was willing to say, you already know what the next 20 minutes were like. You know about the moment your mother starts crying. You know about the moment your father puts his head in his hands. You know about the moment the brother who has been smiling at you your whole life looks across the table and, for the first time, looks at you with hatred, real hatred. The hatred of a man whose entire architecture is being dismantled in front of him, and you know that you will have to keep your voice level anyway. You know all of this already. I am not going to dramatize it for you. I am going to tell it to you straight the way it happened, because the truth was bad enough. I did not bring the credit report. I had decided not to bring it. I did not want the conversation to be about a document I had pulled. I wanted it to be about a document Jonah had created. I let Laurel open her folder. I let her slide the forged cosigner agreement across the table. I let our mother see it. I let our father pick it up. I let Jonah sit there, in his button-down, and say nothing for 38 seconds, and I counted them. My mother said, This isn't real. This is a misunderstanding." Jonah, tell them. Jonah did not. Father said, son, is that your sister's signature? Jonah did not speak. My father said it again, louder. Jonah, is that Marin's signature? And my brother who had sewn a button onto my interview blazer when he was 14, who had told me I was going to get in, who had handed me a coin I rubbed smooth for 18 years. My brother looked at our father and said, very quietly, Dad, it's complicated. My mother started to cry. My father set the document down. He did not yell. My father has never been a man who yells. He just set the document down and he looked at his only son and he said, get out of my house. Jonah said, Dad, get out of my house, right now. We'll talk when I can look at you. It was the cleanest sentence my father had spoken about my brother in a decade. Jonah got up. He looked at me. He looked at Laurel. He looked at our mother, who would not raise her face to him. And he walked out of the house, and he closed the door behind him, and he drove away, and for the first time in my entire adult life, the four of us sat in that kitchen without him at the center of it. My mother was the one who broke the silence. She said to no one in particular, looking at her hands, how much? I said, Mom, how much? How much in debt? How much really? All of it. So I told her I had not brought the report, but I had memorized it. I told her about the 41,000 in collections, the Charlotte judgment, the Lynchburg loan, the IRS payment plan. I told her about the back taxes that her second mortgage had not actually paid. I told her gently that what Jonah had asked me to co-sign for was almost exactly what he owed. He had not been raising capital. He had been laundering debt. He had been moving an old debt onto a new loan with my name on it, and when my name went into default, which it would have, because the startup was, as far as I could tell from 20 minutes of professional digging, a shell with a logo and a Squarespace page, the bank would have come for me. I would have lost the apartment. I might have lost the engagement. I would have lost, at minimum, the next 5 years of my life cleaning up a mess he had made before I ever signed. My mother put her face in her hands. She did not cry loudly. She cried quietly, the way she had cried at her own mother's funeral, in a way that sounded like someone slowly letting the air out of a room. My father sat next to her and did not touch her, because that's not how they touch each other, but he stayed. He stayed the whole time. Laurel reached across the table and held my hand, and I let her, even though we had not held hands since we were children. I want to tell you that this was the end. It wasn't. There were still phone calls. There was still the part where Jonah called me at 11 at night, the following Tuesday, drunk, from a parking lot somewhere, and tried to tell me that I had ruined his life. There was the part where my mother stopped speaking to me for 9 days because she needed someone to be angry at, and I was the easiest target because I was the one who had finally said it. There was the part where my father came to my apartment unannounced on a Sunday morning, 2 weeks later, and stood in my kitchen and apologized. Not for what Jonah had done, but for the 11 years he had spent not seeing it. And that apology was so quiet and so embarrassed and so honest that I had to leave the room and stand in the hallway to keep my composure. There was the part where Reed asked me, in bed on a Thursday night, whether I was okay, and I told him I didn't know, and he said, you don't have to know yet, Marin. You just have to keep breathing. And I cried into his shoulder for an hour, and he did not say a word, and that was the most loved I have felt in my entire life. But the part I want to tell you about, the part that matters, is the part where Jonah finally came home 3 weeks after that Saturday on a Wednesday evening and asked to meet me. Just me. No parents. No Laurel. He picked a diner on Williamson Road, a place we used to go for milkshakes when we were teenagers, and he was already there when I arrived. Sitting in a booth by the window in a jacket I recognized from high school. He looked older than 31. He looked, for the first time, like a man who had stopped performing. I slid into the booth across from him. I did not say hello. He said, Mayor. I said, Jonah. He said, I'm not going to ask you for anything. I want you to know that. I'm not here to ask. I said, okay. He stared at his coffee for a long time. The waitress came. I ordered a water. She left. He said, I don't know how to be the kind of man people think I am. I said nothing. He said, every time I started one of those businesses, I thought this one's going to be the one. This one's going to be the one where Dad looks at me. And then it would fail, and I'd think, I just need one more shot. And then the debt would get bigger, and the lies would get bigger. And I'd tell myself I'd pay everybody back when the big one hit. And the big one never hit. And then one day I was sitting in a coffee shop in Lynchburg and I was looking at a spreadsheet of what I owed. And I realized I'd been lying to everyone I love for so long I couldn't remember what the original lie was. I did not say anything. I did not say it because I knew if I said anything kind, he would take it as permission. And if I said anything cruel, he would take it as the excuse he was looking for. I sat there and I let him talk. He said, I'm Zap, sorry about the signature. I'm sorry about Laurel. I'm sorry about all of it, Mayor. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know I know. I looked at him for a long time. I looked at the boy who had sewn the button. I looked at the man who had forged my name. I looked at the brother I had loved and the brother I had been used by. And I tried to find, in his face, the line where one became the other. I couldn't. I don't think there is a line. I think people just slowly become the thing they keep getting away with. I said, Jonah, I love you. I'm not going to help you. Those two things are going to have to be true at the same time for a while. Maybe for a long time. I'm telling you because you deserve to hear it directly. I'm not signing anything. I'm not lending you anything. I'm not vouching for you to anyone. If you want a relationship with me, a real one, the kind where you're my brother and I'm your sisters, and we sit across from each other at diners, you're gonna have to build it without ever asking me for money again. Not once, not ever. He nodded. He did not argue. He did not perform. He just nodded, and a tear ran down his face, one tear, and he did not wipe it, and I watched it fall onto the formica between us. He said, okay. I said, okay. We sat there for another 20 minutes. We didn't talk about much. We talked about the diner. We talked about a song that was playing. We talked briefly about the button. He remembered it. He remembered the navy thread. He laughed once, very quietly, and I felt the coin in my pocket get a little warmer for the first time in a long time. Not because anything was because something was finally honest. I paid for my water. He paid for his coffee. We walked out into the parking lot. He hugged me. I let him. He smelled like he always smelled, like the cologne he started wearing in college. And for 2 seconds, I was 16 again on a kitchen floor with a blazer in my lap. And then I wasn't, and that was okay, because you cannot live your life on a kitchen floor. He got in his car. I got in mine. We drove in different directions. That was almost a year ago now. I want to tell you where things stand because I think you deserve the real ending, not the neat one. Jonah is living in an apartment in Salem. He is working at a logistics company, actual employment, with a W-2 and a manager, and he is in a debt counseling program through a nonprofit our father found for him. He has paid back, as of last month, a little under $9,000 of what he owes. He has 80-something thousand to go. He calls me on Sundays. We talk for about 20 minutes. We do not talk about money, ever. He has not asked me for $1 in 11 months, and the day he does is the day the Sunday calls end, and he knows that, and I think he is finally a man who knows what a line is. My mother and I had a long conversation in the fall, the kind of conversation we should have had when I was 22, where she told me, with her hands shaking around a glass of iced tea, that she had always known something was wrong with how she had loved her children, and that she had not known how to fix it without admitting it, and that she was sorry, and that she did not expect me to forgive her quickly. I did not forgive her quickly. I am still not all the way there. But she sends me a card every month now, not for an occasion, just a card with her handwriting in it. And I read each one, and I keep each one, and that is its own kind of slow repair. My father drove down to my apartment last Christmas with a small wooden box he had made in his workshop. He is not a man who makes things. He had made this one. Inside was a single brass button, the kind you put on a coat, polished to a shine. He did not explain it. He did not need to. My mother had told him about the blazer at some point in the last 20 years, and he had remembered. He set it on my counter, and he hugged me, and he said, I see you, Marin. I see you now. I'm sorry it took me so long. And I cried into the front of his coat, and he held me the way he should have held me when I was 8. Laurel and I talk every week, sometimes twice. She is, against all odds, the friend I always wanted in a sister. We are making up for lost time on purpose. We're not pretending we didn't lose it. Reed and I got married in October. Small ceremony. Vineyard outside Bedford. My father walked me down the aisle. My mother cried the right way. Jonah was there. He gave a toast. It was short. It was honest. It did not contain the word visionary. It contained, instead, A story about a button and a blazer and a kitchen floor and a sister who he said had taught him, finally, what love with a line in it actually looks like. I cried. Reed held my hand under the table. Laurel squeezed my shoulder. And when Jonah sat back down, he reached across the table and slid something toward me, very quietly, while the toasts continued. It was an envelope. Inside the envelope was $4,200 in cash, and a note that said, in his handwriting, the first one Dad ever gave me, with interest. The rest is coming. I love you, Mare. $4,200. The amount on the carbon copy in the kitchen, all those years ago, that I had paid for my last semester of graduate school, with 2 jobs and ramen 4 nights a week. While my mother told her sister on the phone that I was doing fine, she's always been the practical one. He had remembered the number too. He had carried it the way I had carried the button. He had carried it because, somewhere underneath the man he had become, the boy I had loved had also been keeping score and had finally found a way to settle one line of it. I put the envelope in my purse. I did not count it. I did not have to. I want to tell you something before I go. The people in your life who underestimate you do it because you let them. I let them. I let them for 33 years because the price of being seen accurately by my family had always felt higher than the price of being seen wrongly, and I had paid the wrong price for so long I forgot it was a price. The night I asked to see the credit report, I didn't do anything dramatic. I just stopped paying. I just decided that the cost of being the practical one, invisible, useful, leaned on, never asked, had finally exceeded the cost of being the difficult one. And the moment I decided that, the whole architecture of how my family worked started to come apart, because the whole architecture had been resting on my willingness to keep paying. If you are listening to this, and you are the practical one in your family, the one who fixes it, the one who covers it, the one who has asked and asked and asked and never asked back, I want you to know something. You are not selfish for adding it up. You are not cold for wanting to see the paperwork. You are not unloving for asking the question. Love without a line in it is not love. It is access. And the people who have had access to you for a long time will tell you that drawing the line is the cruel thing. It is not the cruel thing. The cruel thing was them never asking how you were doing. I am sitting at my kitchen table as I tell you this. Same table, different light. There is a coffee cake on the counter. I still bake when I'm thinking. And Reed is upstairs and the radiator is clicking. And outside the window, the maple tree my landlord almost cut down last fall is starting to bud again. Across from me, on the chair where Jonah sat that Tuesday night in March. There is no document, there is no portfolio, there is no half-inch smile sliding off the left side of anyone's mouth. There is just an empty chair, and a brass button in a wooden box on the windowsill, and a quiet life I built for myself by finally asking, in my own kitchen, for the same piece of paper any stranger at a bank would have been entitled to. So I want to ask you, not as writer, as a woman who is still figuring it out, one Sunday phone call at a time, what is the one piece of paper you have been afraid to ask the people you love for? And what would your life look like if you asked for it tomorrow?